Welcome to another episode of the Impact Driven Brand Series. Welcome to another episode of the Impact Driven Brand Series. I am your host, Courtney Lee, and I'm so excited about today's episode because we are joined by the incredible Miss Fanny Tristan, who is the unstoppable force behind the Impact brand Restorative Space. And she is not just making a living, she's making an extraordinary impact in the Black community. And as the daughter of Afro-Peruvian immigrants, Fanny's background is infused into her work as a psychotherapist. Her therapy approach goes beyond the surface, encouraging her clients to dig deep and to find the roots of their thoughts and their emotions. And guess what? She's not afraid to sprinkle some little pop culture in her sessions, utilizing some Rihanna lyrics here and there to really make therapy an unforgettable journey for her clients. So, Fanny, I want to thank you so much for being here today. We're truly honored to have you, and I'm really excited about this conversation. So, welcome.
Thank you so much, Courtney. It's such an honor to be here.
Yes. So, Fanny, what I want to say is before we really dive in, can we give our listeners just a little glimpse into your background? You know, as the founder of Restorative Space, you're making a significant impact in the lives of women in New York and New Jersey. You have a boatload of experience in the mental health space. So can you tell us a little bit about your journey and what inspired you to pursue a career in counseling?
Yeah, sure. So I've been doing social work for over 10 years. And so my background is in social work, and I've been doing this work for a long time. And so I think New York has been one of the greatest places to learn about people, to learn about communities and families, because everybody's here. We're all here, right? And so I've really had the blessing to really integrate into many communities and learn so much about how we function as part of a community, as part of a system. And I think my social work background has really been so important to the therapist that I am today, because I don't just look at a person and see like what's going on in their mind. It's more what's going on in their mind in the context of who they are in the world, right? And I think as a Black therapist, as a Black female therapist, I can't help but see my work through that lens of how, race, culture, ethnicity, gender, and all of these things impact our mental health and how we move through the world and how we're able to make the change that we can see in the world.
Yes, I love that so much. And for the listeners, this is something that I have not been discussing so much so in the course of my work. But if you have been following me for some time, you may have heard me mention, that I also have a background in social work and mental health. Started out working in group homes and just kind of moved different positions as, my education continued and so on and so forth. My fellow social worker knows what I mean.
Mhm.
But yes, I totally agree. So you have a completely different perspective from really being in the community, starting out working in the community as a social worker, as opposed to someone who just decides they want to get into counseling and they don't really have that boots on the ground experience. So I love that you mentioned that, because I think that's really important, to know that you have a therapist who has been immersed in the community and has really worked one-on-one with the community, and can really have a much larger perspective on their life as a whole, as opposed to just what's going on in the mind, and the diagnosis. So I feel like the diagnosis, like that's the really, the surface level. We really have to dig deep into what is happening around us, what's happening around, within our environment that leads to that diagnosis. So I really love that you mentioned that. So what I would love to know is, based on your personal background, right? Like your experience as a Black woman, how does that influence your practice with clients? So in the therapy space, we talk about self-disclosure, what's okay to disclose, how to actually use that in your practice. How do you use self-disclosure, your personal journey, when you're working specifically with Black women in your practice today?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think I've always come from a place of knowing that a lot of the Black women that seek me want to be working with someone that looks like them or that they feel can identify with them. And that doesn't mean that I'm going to kind of jump in full on, we're best friends, right? That's not the nature of the relationship at all. I think that there's a value added in the emotional safety or really trust that can be a foundation in the space that allows the deeper work to happen, right? I know that as a mental health provider, I'm asking a lot of my clients. I'm asking them to be honest, not just with me, but with themselves about things that they may have been avoiding for a long time and for maybe even good reason, right? And so I need to kind of treat that process with respect. And I think that when I'm working with women that look like me, that I need to be aware that there's a lot of value in them feeling comfortable and safe, especially if you're coming from a community where there's a lot of stigma around mental health, that it's a secret that you're even coming to see me, that you would tell your mother everything, but you would not tell her that you are in this room with me, right? Because of the fear of judgment, right? And so always keeping that in mind when I'm in the room and, keeping that in mind when I think about what to share, right? Is what I'm about to share, an attempt to build that community for my client to feel that they are not alone, that I understand where they're coming from, that I've seen where they're coming from, right? And will that help facilitate more of that openness that they need in order to really open those doors to do that work?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, that makes so much sense. So in your work, what would you say are like the top maybe 2 or 3 themes that show up the most for Black women specifically?
That's a really good question. What are the top 2 or 3 themes?
Or even one?
Yeah, well, I find that, I work a lot with millennials who are going through major transitions and that they're really struggling with maintaining their confidence and self-esteem through those transitions. And I think the top 2 big life changes that I'm noticing they're struggling with is first-time motherhood, right? And the other one being just really big breakups, right? And so the breakups being like, I've been in a 3-year relationship and now I'm in my mid-30s and I thought I was going to have a house and a family and all the things. And now what am I going to do? What is of me in my life if I'm not in this relationship, right? Having that crisis of faith. Right. And I think in terms of first time motherhood, right, I always say that motherhood has like the best PR in the world. Okay. It's got us convinced that we are superhuman and that all of it is supposed to come natural to us. And it shouldn't be hard. And everything's supposed to just fall into place because you are now a mother, right? And that is so far from the truth, not only with the clients that I see, but also my own personal experience. I have a 3-year-old daughter. I'm a first-time mom in this pandemic. It was hard. It was hard to not do it with community the way that I had pictured it. And it really opened my eye to how little support there is for moms, these first-time moms who are like, hit in the face, being told that everything was going to fall into place because you finally have your baby and really you feel the farthest from yourself ever in your life, right? And so what do you do with all those emotions? How do you process them? How do you get back to yourself? And I think that there's a real parallel there with how women often feel anytime they have the rug swiped from under them, like breakups in that way.
Yes. And you could almost associate it with trauma, to be honest. You're literally getting smacked in the face with reality. And I can completely relate to that because I remember when I was pregnant with my first child, they were like, oh my goodness, it's not going to be about you anymore. It's all about the baby. And I'm like, okay, yes, I can live with that. But when the baby got here, it was That everyone still has their own lives. Everyone is still trying to build things. So, I would definitely say for a lot of mothers, there may have been this idea of the type of support that they were expecting to have versus the reality of what that looks like, once they have their child. So I have definitely seen that working with mothers in the community, doing like case management work and things like that, and just really trying to figure out like resources to help in those areas, childcare and things like that. And I mean, it can be overwhelming for sure. And I have a 3-year-old as well. But I also have 2 boys as well. So I have a 12-year-old and a 9-year-old. So when you talk about
Your hands are full.
feeling like you have to be superwoman, I mean, it's no joke, because when you get into the mommy mode, it's like, okay, what sometimes you don't really incorporate that self-care that you should because you're just laser focused on your children's needs. I think it's so beautiful that you have that clients that you serve actually have you to kind of work through some of those major transitions in like motherhood, first time motherhood, and so on and so forth. So yeah, it can be challenging, but what I would love to know from you is based on what you just described that you see in your practice with the challenges that are coming up within your clientele. How do you help your clients to kind of navigate those challenges? Because I feel like with therapy, the client has to warm up to you. So like, what does that journey look like in the beginning versus like, what does that transformation look like, I guess I should say?
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned the word trauma before because it's actually part of that path for many of my clients. So I have a specialty in a trauma-specific therapy called cognitive processing therapy. It's kind of this fast-paced, around 13-session therapy model aimed at decreasing trauma-related symptoms. And what I often find is that I'll have clients that first come to me because something happened, right? They just had a baby, they just got a divorce, they just had a breakup, and they want to be able to talk and process through these things. And sometimes they'll be like, I think there are these patterns and I've been doing them for a long time and I'm really sick of these patterns, right? And they're kind of implying that there's something deeper from the past that I might not want to name yet because I don't really know you, but there's something going on that I want to be able to just plant that seed. And I pick up on it every time because what often happens is that we will start with, a much more casual one-on-one therapy approach where I'm meeting you where you're at, right? If you're not ready to name it, I'm going to figure out when it's time to name it and help you name it, right? We're going to meet where you're ready to meet because I'm not in the business of making people process trauma they don't want to, right? I don't think that's effective. And I'm not your parent. I'm not here to make you do things, right? You're grown up. And so you're going to go out in the world and you're going to do things the way that you feel most comfortable. And so my goal is always for you to be able to leave the therapy room with, the confidence that you need to go and make those decisions you need to do for yourself because you've thought through them in the space and you are in control of those decisions always, right? And I think what I often find with my clients is that they're there for that immediate conflict that they have going on in their life. And if we find ourselves going back to certain periods of time, certain people, right, certain events that have had a big influence in the way that they're thinking, in the view that they have about some of the things going on, then we start talking about how trauma works, right? How it impacts, how trauma is a lens in which we see the world and ourselves and other people, right? And so when we get to a point where they are able to make that connection, they're often ready to do that deeper trauma-specific work because they see how connected it all is, right? And so sometimes I'll get a client that already knows that and they're like, I'm ready to do the specific therapy that it says that you do, right? And then you have people who, are really, they're not there yet and they kind of want to just start talking and they want to build trust. And I think through that natural process, we get to start doing that trauma work.
Yes, I love that so much. And I love how you mention like the patterns that come up because that is one of the things that I really want to shed some light on in this show is, that the patterns are there, they do exist. And the patterns that we are experiencing today, individually and collectively, as a Black community, they are tied to historical events, historical patterns, systemic racism that has been established, but also maintained. And so when you think about patterns and, the subconscious mind and everything that has to do with really just that imprint that has been placed on us as Black women, as Black men, just within the Black community in general, it's really eye-opening when you look at the different things that are happening within our community. When you talk about Jim Crow, Black codes, covenants, when it comes to, selling property and not selling property to, people of color. I feel like it's an invisible thing for some people, but these things are coming up for us in our lives as well. And not all of us are able to really connect the dots when it comes to how far back this trauma really goes. So I would love to know, in your opinion, like let's say the confidence piece that you mentioned with your client, how do you see, the confidence piece being connected to the systemic racism of the past, as well as how it's been maintained and how it's still showing up in the present? So when we talk about discrimination in the workplace, you talk about healthcare, all the things that we've seen, working in the community with our clients, how do you see that as the invisible monster, I guess you could say? And how is that something that comes up when you're talking with clients, especially, Black women?
Yeah, I love this question, Courtney, because I think that when we talk about trauma, right, I was just saying how trauma is this lens that we end up using to see the world, ourselves, other people, right? And so when you have generational trauma, right, that stems from these systems that are still very much alive today, right, that lens, we're still wearing it, right? And so what does that look like concretely for our day-to-day lives, especially as Black women? I think a lot of it is encapsulated in our self-worth, like how we actually see ourselves, right? Do we walk into rooms with what we offer? Are we walking into rooms already assuming that we lack something, right? That we are inferior, that we need to prove something in order to be an equal, right? And where does that come from? Where does this mentality come from that you are less than, right? And we can count all of the subliminal ways that American culture and American society has given us that message that we are less than, right? And so I think that's kind of the way that it shows up in our day to day. Because when we think about these big transitions in our lives, right? These breakups, these, first time parenthood, right? We are constantly faced with, am I enough? Am I good enough? I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can do this alone. What did I just do? I have terrible judgment, right? All the woulda, coulda, shouldas that drown us in our pain, that leave us depressed, right? That leave us really anxious, right? And I think that there is this clear connection of, well, where was the foundation? Because did the foundation already include this outlook on yourself that you had everybody fooled, that all the success that you had was you're just an imposter and you just got by because of luck and God, right? That the real you isn't really capable of doing this hard stuff and that, you don't know what to do now, right? And I think that's yeah, exactly. And I think that is one of the ways that generational trauma really shows up, because it all comes from that foundation of who celebrated you, what resources did you have, right? How did people treat your family? How did people treat your loved ones, right? Because even if you can say, oh, well, I'm doing better than my parents did and they've worked really hard and I have all of these great privileges, but do you remember those times where you felt like you saw your parent, talked down to, or that you didn't see them as a superhero because of an interaction that you witnessed or an argument they had with a landlord, right? all of those little memories, we make conclusions from them, right? That we don't even acknowledge, right? That they are part of the lens that we put on when we move through the world.
Yes, absolutely. I love that was like the perfect answer.
I love talking about this stuff.
So much from that. Yes, yes, I love it. And I'm going to be honest with you. This is not a topic that I discussed on a regular basis. I lost my grandmother back in November, Veterans Day. And I really just felt like after her transition, she was guiding me. Of course, my ancestors are guiding me to finding answers. I shared on my last episode that I recorded with another guest that, and I guess this is going to be a part of my brand story now, that I signed up for a podcast matching platform when I first started my podcast about 8-9 months ago. And I wasn't connected to one Black woman. And I felt bad. I felt guilty that for me, as a Black woman, I hadn't noticed it, or I hadn't, taken the time to have that social responsibility to say, hey, wait a minute, I've been connected with 3, white women, but I still haven't been connected with one. Let me tweak some settings. Let me see what's going on here. It took for, I think, about 6 interviews before I'm like, wait a minute now, what is going on? But I was grappling with also that feeling of, well, I don't want to single, the women that I was connected with out either. I don't want to, but I also have a responsibility. I am producing content. I am publishing conversations. And I'm like, these in my heart, I'm like, these are not the only conversations that should be had, and my grandmother's passing and just remembering the wisdom that she, and the seeds that she continuously planted along during her raising me, helping to raise me, those they were coming to the surface after her passing. And I'm like, something isn't right here. And then that's what really drove me into really doing my own investigation, and just exploring. And what I really want you listening to realize is it's okay if you're not walking in the image of Harriet Tubman and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Okay? It's okay if you don't know everything that there is to know about systemic oppression and the history of our people. But if you can just start today and just take that first step, like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, take that first step and just be more intentional with where you're investing, where your support is going. It's not to say that, no, you're not supposed to support anyone but Black people, but just once you begin to uncover this history and you realize, the disparities that exist and why and how this was designed, then it's natural for you to start walking more intentionally, going through life more intentionally, as opposed to just everything just kind of like, flowers and rainbows because, we're not in slavery. No. And based on the study that I have been delving into, to me, I feel like slavery just looks different today. And so I'm so glad that you mentioned that, these are patterns. This is being passed down through parenting as well. Our great grandparents, our grandparents, how were they treated? Were they working in the cotton fields, working for other white families? Were they, how were they treated? And even after slavery was abolished, what are some of the systemic things that we saw happening to block us in every direction, in every industry? And how do we navigate now with that level of consciousness? So I would say the goal, this show, and just the brand in general, is to shed some more light on what's happening around us, but really address the covert way that it shows up that we may not even realize. Some of us may not even realize. And, help us to kind of go down that path of just knowing, becoming more aware, and then going from there. Not, there shouldn't be any guilt, because you don't know every policy in the book, know every activist that ever existed, because I feel like that can also keep us away from actually diving in and really exploring what needs to be explored by more of us. More of us need to be uncovering this system that we live in, because we are affected by it, whether you can't opt out of it. Let's just say that. As a Black woman, as a Black man, we don't have the choice to opt out of systemic racism. So I really thank you for sharing that, because I don't think many of us, and even our parents, realize how they've been affected, as a result of slavery and systemic racism. I feel like if we are not diving into this information, researching when we can, investigating, just kind of uncovering things as we go through life, as opposed to just focusing on building wealth and what are we trying to gain and achieve? No, it's really time for us to start realizing why we have been in this cycle, striving, trying to achieve, because it's because of systemic racism.
Oh, yeah. And I definitely think that, when we think about breaking those barriers, right? And when I think about some of the women that I look up to that I think have really been succeeding in that, I think about like Issa Rae. I love her so much, and all the Issa Raes that are out there, right? That she goes on talks where she's talking about, everyone's so preoccupied with climbing and trying to like reach up to all these people that have this power to get the things that they need, but that you need to just look around you and you all need to rise together and use each other as your resources. And then you're all kind of lifting each other up, and you don't need all of this other stuff above. They will come clawing when you have all of the things that you have to offer out in the way that you want it to. And that's exactly what she's done. And I'm so inspired by her work because of that. And I'm inspired to the connection that she has to Black people, because there's values that she clearly has led with. And I really admire that. And I think that's a big part of my value and the work that I do and who I like to work with. And I think it's so important that we're aware of all of the things that you were saying, Courtney, because we are, like you said, we are by default part of the system. And so even if we get to a point where we do build that wealth, that we do build to all of these things, are we conscious of the ways that we are using that to continue to rise each other, to create that opportunity for each other? Or are we gatekeeping, just like, white supremacy has set the system up to be, right? Where now, there will be a point in this world, and I think it was Angelica Jade Bastian that had said this, that there will be some point in time where white supremacy will no longer need white people to exist and to continue to function, and that time is now, right? Really powerful. She's a film critic, and she's one of my favorite film critics out there. And, she's talking about it in the film and entertainment space, right? Where we're so preoccupied, this one specific industry and having this like representation, but also realizing that there is art all over the world that Black people are making that's amazing, and that we're not even celebrating that because we care so much about the white gaze, and that all of this work that we're putting through is all still aimed this goal of white supremacy, right? And so why aren't we celebrating what we already have? Why aren't we uplifting all of the things that we already have? Because we are already amazing, right? But it's all for this recognition. And so I think about what are the ways that I participate in that in my work and in my journey as an entrepreneur, as someone that is trying to build my family and my wealth, and how am I bringing my community with me? How am I bringing the work that I do in my therapy office and bringing it outside of the office, which is why I'm starting to run retreats and having events, because I want to bring wellness to Black women, to Black people, right? And it's kind of all behind that value. No, there is enough here, and we just need to strengthen each other to lift that up. And I want to support people of color. I want to support Black women to strive for the things that they want and to remind them that they are so valuable.
Yes, I love that so much. I love that you touched on the fact that it's the film creator that you mentioned, who said that white supremacy is looking like it's going to be able to be maintained without white people. I feel like that is a word in and of itself. And it's like, it's so sad because when you think about it, of course, we wouldn't want it to be that way.
Mm-hmm.
You know, of course, we wouldn't want it to be that way. Clearly, there has been indoctrination that sadly is showing us that that's the direction that we're going. So how can we break that cycle? How can we dismantle, this system by, is this a word? Undoctrinating?
Decolonizing.
Yes. How can we do that? And we can do that by just becoming more aware and just caring enough to investigate and do our research. When we see things happening in our communities that we know isn't right, how can we contribute to a better world for our children and the generations to follow? What can we do? And it doesn't have to be this grandiose thing. Like you said, you're doing retreats to help Black women to, really embrace wellness and self-care, and just because when you do that, you're creating the space to even have the time and the capacity to say, wait a minute, like what is going on here? Why are the funds being mismanaged in this community? And why am I seeing these particular things happening around me that I know just aren't right, are more so aligned with racism and white supremacy, and also not being afraid to speak up, whether it's in your workplace, knowing your rights, knowing the policies that are in place, and using them to your advantage, just like our ancestors did. That, because I feel like a lot of us are just not knowledgeable, the power that we have. And I feel like the white supremacist is banking on the ignorance, is banking on exactly how they designed it to be. That's why you see in certain states CRT being banned. And I think Florida, I just heard that they are implementing something where now they are trying to teach the children why slavery was necessary for the building of America.
Wow.
Yeah. I think, if I'm not mistaken, this is in Florida. So there's been a lot happening in Florida, of course. But it goes back to, like, what are we actually doing here? Are we doing the work on ourselves so that we can be empowered, so that we can take steps forward to create the change that is not just going to affect us as a Black community, it's going to affect everyone, because racism does not just affect the Black community. Can I just say that? Like, to the white supremacists out there, I really don't understand how, especially if you have children, if you care about the future of your children and whether or not they're going to be fighting the same fight, whether or not this world is going to be going into ruin, please just wake up. That's all I'm asking is, do you care about your children?
Yeah. I mean, I think, there's a concerted effort to keep people uneducated, right? And ignorant to a lot of our history in this country. And I think that it has caused a level of stagnation that is a huge detriment to our future. And in turn, the world, right? The future of the world. And it's painful to think about, right? Especially as mothers, right? That this is a world that our kids are going to inherit, and that, we can put all our faith in the next generation doing what they got to do. And it pains me that I'm part of a generation that is fighting the same fight, right? Like, climate change has been happening, right? Yeah. People were talking about making big changes in the 80s.
Yeah.
Right? That was a long time ago. That was like 30 something plus years ago. It's just, it's ridiculous that we're fighting these fights, and that we are dealing with a lot of the issues in our government that we've had back then, and that there hasn't really been progress in the way that is lasting, that actually improves the lives of the whole. And yeah, I mean, I think you can't help but think about that and be disappointed and in America because of that.
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons why I said it's so important that we are doing the work on ourselves, because when we're doing the work on ourselves, that's going to trickle down to our children. The conversations that need to be had will be had with our children. I was talking about this on the last episode that just aired with another guest, that I asked her, and I'll ask you as well, are these conversations that were being had around the dinner table in your household? Because I know for me, my grandmother specifically, I remember her planting seeds and talking about it here and there. But in general, the conversation mainly was around career and, just really career and how to develop as a professional and how to build economic freedom. So these are conversations that I am now having with my children. But when I first started having these conversations with them, it was very difficult for me to just put into words. And so then I began to have an understanding on why maybe this wasn't the topic of conversation for my mother, because I'm like, she is busy trying to make sure she keeps a roof over our head, takes care of us. So she really didn't have an opportunity for self-care. And it just goes to show that if we don't stop it at some point, we're basically just going to be working like slaves, pretty much just maintaining that system that was designed, eons ago. And we look up and before we know it, like nothing is changing. So do you remember or do you recall having these conversations as you were growing up in your household?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it was very interesting, when I think back at the conversations I would have with my family, because I came to the US very young. I was about 4 years old. And so we were like a Black Latino immigrant family. And I think that that's come with a lot of its own trauma. And I think like trauma does, it isolates you. So we were very isolated. We only really associated with other Peruvians because we were afraid. We didn't know a lot, and we just were led by example of the people that we knew. And so in one part, I had parents that would always remind me growing up, there's nothing free in this world. And really trying to have these like real talks with me about this is our lot in life because of who we are, because of how we look. But I also think that, this is the 80s, right? And you had, government officials, I think it was the Clintons, calling Black people like super criminals or something like that, and like just really vilifying Black people while also being like everyone's favorite like Black president. It was just such a bizarre time. But right, a lot of ignorance going on at this time, and I'm sure I'm mixing decades and years together. But I think ultimately there's this concern about, oh well, my parents were also very subject to like the model minority myth. Right? This idea of like, no, we're just going to work really hard and it's all going to be worth it because we're not going to have to live the way we did when we were back in our homelands, right? Where we were also second-class citizens because Black Peruvians are a very small part of the population. And having to recognize that I'm like in this margin, right? Where it's like, well, Latinos don't necessarily treat me like an equal because not all of them are Black Latinos, right? And so there is this hierarchy there and there's colorism there. But then also like Black kids see me differently because I'm not like them, or they know I speak Spanish, right? And so I've always kind of been on this margin. And I think that not only did I just get information from family and my community, but also I've learned a lot just being an observer in these kind of outside spaces, looking in and being like, I'm not a part of this, but you're letting me be a part of it enough for me to really be able to observe and think about it. And I think that that's really been to my benefit of learning growing up, because it made me understand like, oh, well, of course my parents would fall into the model minority myth because my dad had to have 3 jobs, right? And how else do you convince yourself to do that if there's no means to this end, right? He had to believe that it was all for something, right? And I think only in his later years was he kind of realizing like, no, the man is the man is the man. So no matter how hard you work, right? Is that, some things are set up to only let you succeed so high, and that there is this glass ceiling, and that he's seeing that in his daughter, right? Who has developed a similar work ethic. And it's like, yes, I'm going to work really hard and I have a lot of integrity and all of these things. And why are these things not working out for, right? And recognizing that I can't blame myself all the time. I can't always say that it's always my fault that things don't work out all the time. There has to also be something by design that happens, right? And so there's there's a balance. There's this balance, you being accountable to educate yourself, to understand what's going on, and to recognize your power and your worth and what you can control to make the changes that you want, and also recognizing that you are not operating in a vacuum and that you are part of a system, and that you have to have that in mind as you make your decisions, especially when you're making decisions about yourself and who you are.
Oh my gosh. Fanny, you are, this is, this is such a great conversation because I feel like that is something that we as Black women can struggle with, is identifying with identifying with shortcomings that were placed upon us. Now, obviously, we are all responsible for our own lives, for making a living, for parenting our children and all of that good stuff. That's everyone across the board. But then when you place systemic racism, when you put that in the mix and you think about how that can break a person down, how that can break a community down, when you think about a wealth gap, what is it? I think it was 2019, they said the wealth gap between Black and white Americans it was 24,000 for the Black household versus 180,000 for a white household. And then there was even a study that came out that showed that a white household that is led by white high school dropouts was wealthier than Black households led by college graduates.
Wow.
That, it's like, how do you explain that?
How do you, yeah.
Working hard. Okay.
Exactly. Like, how would you look at all of those Black graduates and look at them and be like, you didn't work hard enough?
Yes. It's like, so I feel like the more that we shed light on these types of things that are coming out, into the world and being revealed, the more we can give ourselves grace. And even though this study of, history and delving into history, systemic racism over the course of history, it can be draining. It can be mentally draining. Some of us don't want to dig into it because, it's like, listen, I have enough on my plate. You'd rather not be bothered with it. You feel like, oh, that's, this person over here, what is it? Crump's, responsibility. That's what he decided to do with his career. But it's not. We have to think about it way more differently than it being someone's career or their work. This is all of our work, and that is something that I came to realize the more that I delved into this. It's like, if you are a Black in the world, not just America, in the world, then it's your work, however you want to slice it. So it's beautiful that I think about it like this. It's our work within our respective industries. So for you, you are making waves and helping women to become more empowered. You have this information, but it's not about victimhood. It's about really becoming empowered with this information and realizing, oh, wait a minute. I knew I wasn't crazy. I know I'm talented. I know I'm worthy, and really just flipping that script when you realize all of the efforts that were put into hindering us in every direction, it says a lot about who we are as a people. If it takes this much and this much effort for a racial group to oppress another racial group, that should give us grace in and of itself, to realize that even with all of that, we are still here, we are still thriving, we are still connecting. More and more people are waking up and connecting and helping to change that narrative and to liberate one another. And so whatever that looks like for you within your industry, whether that's mental health, whether that's the financial industry or the policy industry, what can you do to contribute to the collective vision that we have for the world? And notice I feel like we are always the ones that's like, how can we make the world better? Because we're like, how dare we say, make it better for our people? But yes, for our people, because look at what has been done along the course of history to us as a people. So why shouldn't we feel like, we want to liberate our people for our people? But I feel like that also that's our heart. I feel like that's what makes us different.
Yeah. And change starts with us and doing things on a local level, right? I think that's what becomes so frustrating kind of for us as a country, right? Where it's like, we're only going to come out to vote when there's a president. What about like, what's your investment in your neighborhood, your community? Like understanding what's getting built, what's happening with the money that you're putting into your taxes, and actually having a say as to what you want being done with that money, right? That's not going to change because you vote once every 4 years, like it's just, yes, we really have to start with us and the impact that we're having just within our circles. And it may start at the dinner table.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's okay if that's just where you're starting. If you're just starting with research, that's something, because you're opening the door and you're going to be able to do a lot following that. But at least you're not just shutting the door and saying, hey, I don't want to be bothered with it. It's too stressful, too complicated, it's history. No, it's today. It's present. It's happening right now. It's being maintained right now. So care about what the world looks like for your children and the next generations, then you better be doing something.
Yeah, exactly.
So I would love for you to just share with us before we wrap up, and we share with everyone how they can connect with you, and what does the future look like for Restorative Space as far as how you're serving your clients based on things that you've been seeing throughout your practice? What does it look like to work with Fanny going forward into the future? Let's say the next 3 years, next year. What does that look like? And how do you see your brand, I guess, kind of shifting into the future and based on how you serve your clients?
Yeah.
It's not going to be just traditional therapy. So I would love to know, because I love that you mentioned the retreats. And I feel like when people think about going to seek help, they think therapy, but there's more to that. So can you tell us a little bit about what you see Restorative Space growing into as a brand?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Restorative Space is going to become not just a psychotherapy space, but a wellness space. My practice is completely virtual. I love the fact that as a therapist that is licensed in New York City, that lives in New York City, licensed in the state of New York, and see one of the few Black people up in Niagara Falls who are like, I can't find a Black therapist up here, right? I love that so much,
Yes.
right? And so I want to expand that. Like, I want to be able to be licensed in more states. I want to be able to grow with up and coming therapists that align with the same values, right? That want to learn about all of this and want to, work with the same passion that I have for the community that I serve, and being able to provide even more, right? And I think a lot of it starts with these events that I'm going to be doing, right? Doing these kind of local afternoon retreats, doing my first big international retreat next year. We're going to be going to Oaxaca City in late April, and I'm so excited, and really building and curating these experiences where we're going to take the work out of the therapy room and let the world really be our guide. Let the world teach us about ourselves by integrating into communities, by giving ourselves space to think, to chill, right? To commune with other people that are not like us, that we have a lot to learn from and who have a lot to learn from us, right? And I'm so intentional about creating these spaces where we're there to dig into the communities. We're there to invest in these spaces that we're learning from, right? That's a big part of that experience. And putting a lot of wellness in there, right? Because in order for us to give and provide, we also need to receive, and we need to recharge, and reminding ourselves of how good it can feel and how restorative it is to do things like yoga and sound baths and ceremonies that really help us kind of meditate and be at peace with ourselves.
Yes. So let me ask you a question. So based on what you just mentioned, it sounds like you're going to be a little bit busier, right? You have a 3-year-old, you are married, you have your practice, but now the retreats is branching off into really entrepreneurship as well. And really, I say, owning your own practice, that's entrepreneurship too as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how do you incorporate your brand building piece? Like, are you getting more visible on social? Are you making, more connections like the ones we are having, speaking on stages and all of that good stuff? How does that fit into the mix, and how do you manage the responsibilities?
Yeah, that's a good question, right? Because it's ultimately like that question that we all face as women, as mothers of, can we have it all? Right. And I think that for me, I lean a lot into my community to be able to do these things. Right. I work very hard in my marriage with my partner about what equity really looks like, what support really looks like. Right. It's not just, I need a woke bae. It's about having a partner that understands what that means to give me the space to be the entrepreneur, right? Because I would do that for him, right? And women do that for their partners all of the time without thinking, and make sure that I have a partner that's really going to show up in the way that I need them to, right? To make sure that our daughter is taken care of and has everything that she needs, that we are still connecting with our family, and that we still make time for each other and for ourselves, and that we're growing together. And so I think that that's a big part of it, right? There is a man behind this woman, right? And I really think that that's an important part of the piece. And I think for my own personal growth is I've had to learn to ask for help, right? I've had to really undo a lot of that me, myself, and I mentality, and realize that if I'm going to build something big, I'm going to need help. And I'm going to need to outsource to professionals that are really good at what they do to help me shine and to give me the space to focus on the things that I want to be focusing on. Because when I'm in that therapy room, that's all that matters. I am present. I'm not thinking about branding. I'm not thinking about all of this other stuff. I'm being there present with you, and that's what you deserve, right? And so if that means I had to outsource all of these other parts of my business in order to make that happen, then that's what's going to happen. And I have no problem asking for help, because that's what's going to make me show up and practice what I preach.
Yes, I love that. And that was the perfect answer and perfect segue before we wrap up into why it's so important to ask for help, enlist the help of professionals who thrive in their own lane. Fanny thrives in her lane of empowering women in the mental health space as a psychotherapist, giving them that tunnel vision, support, impact-driven brand agency. That is how the impact-driven brand agency was birthed. We want to allow you the space to ride that momentum. You have, in our space, we go to conferences, we go to workshops and trainings, and we have all of this information and we have all this momentum. And then when it's time to put it in practice behind the scenes, it's like, okay, what do I do now? What do I do first? Okay, I had this to-do list. I had this to-do list. But that is what the impact-driven brand agency is for. It's for us to do a complete assessment on where you are in your business, what it is that you are looking to create, what are the results that you provide for your clients, what is your deep down, what is your vision and your mission, and how you want to serve your clients and help them to reach their goals. Well, that is where we come in to help you to reach your goal and building your brand and your impact. We want you to focus on spreading that impact, because as you can see in this conversation, it is very much needed. We need it, okay? And we specifically work with professionals who are in the mental health, mindset, policy, and financial space, because those are the three areas that I have identified that we see the most significant disparities in our community, in the Black community. And so if that is also a part of why I have decided to pivot into impact brand building as opposed to just business and brand building, which is where I was kind of coming out of previously. So the idea is to connect. If I'm going to help someone to build a brand and build their business and build this impact brand, I want to align myself with people who are actually going to be making an impact where it matters for our children and for the next generations. And we know that is mindset, financial and wealth building, and policy. So that is where the white power structure is dominating, to be honest. As you can see, the mental health piece, whether you want to admit it or not. Indoctrination, depression, anxiety, all of these things are a result of systemic racism, white supremacy, and it's affecting our mindset. So we need to be aware of this, and we need to be doing the work, because everything else stems from that. The mindset, the mental health is the foundation. And then from there, we want to build that wealth. We want to become more economically empowered. We want to make sure that we know what's going on in our community with these policies that are being passed, CRT being banned, and now in Florida, whatever they have going on where they're trying to justify slavery. I mean, come on. So this was really the goal of my pivot into building the impact-driven brand agency, because not only do I want to help you to build your business and build your brand and build that infrastructure behind the scenes, but I want to enjoy doing it. I want to work with more people like Fanny, with more people like other guests that I've had and have lined up, because that's our way of organizing and mobilizing. This is the way that we can do it within our own respective industries. So I just want to thank you so much, Fanny, for coming on today. This was a beautiful conversation. As you can see, we are running over. I don't want it to end, but it has to end. I can get you back on in the future. Maybe, down the line, I've been thinking about, maybe having an in-person podcast setting where we have a beautiful set and we, maybe have some wine. And so maybe in the future, when we get that all set up, we could have you come out to Atlanta and we can do it again. But thank you so much for being on. And can you please share with the people how they can reach you, where they can reach you? And everything will also be in the show notes as well, everyone.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, no, thank you so much for having me, Courtney. This has really been a pleasure. If folks would like to follow me, I'm on Instagram at restority.space. They can also find me on my website, which is also restority.space. I also have a blog on there where I talk about all my favorite movies and TV shows and the mental health lens that I have in that work. And so people can find me there. And also I'll be sharing information on both of those spaces about my upcoming retreats and events.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, that's a wrap, everyone. Please check out the show notes so that you can connect with Fanny. And if you are looking to build your impact brand, whether you're a new entrepreneur, aspiring entrepreneur, or you're a seasoned entrepreneur, if you know you cannot handle it all on your own, look in the show notes. Make sure you take our impact brand assessment. There's some information there that we will collect from you so that we can give you a proper brand, business, and brand audit, assess everything, and then schedule that Zoom call so that we can propose what our strategy is to spread your impact, because that's what it's all about. All right, until next time, I'll see you in the next episode. Bye. That's a wrap for today's episode. Please like, subscribe, share with the people you care about, and leave a review. I'll catch you in the next one.